Dr. Shun, if you refuse this surgery, I'll personally make sure you never touch an operating table again. Chief Surgeon Victor Hahn stood at the end of the conference table, one hand resting on the patient file, his expression calm enough to make the threat sound like a routine administrative decision. Around him, 7 surgeons avoided my eyes. I looked at the file, then at Victor, then at the name printed beneath the emergency classification. Ethan Cole. My fingers went cold. Not because the patient was unfamiliar, because I had already watched him die once. Dr. Shun, Victor's voice sharpened. Did you hear me? I slowly closed the file. I heard you. Good. He pushed it toward me. Then you understand. The patient has a ruptured thoracic aneurysm, severe coagulopathy, and unstable cardiac function. No one in this hospital has a better chance than you. A quiet laugh escaped me. No one noticed how strange it was. Victor certainly didn't. He thought he had cornered me. He thought he was giving me a choice between obeying him and destroying my career. He had no idea that I had already lived through this night. I had died because of this surgery, and 3 years later, I had somehow been given another life. The fluorescent lights above me hummed softly. The clock on the wall showed 7:43 p.m. Exactly the same time. Exactly the same patient. Exactly the same man standing across from me. But this time, I knew what happened next. I knew who would betray me. I knew which artery would rupture. I knew why the surgical records would later be altered. And most importantly, I knew Victor Hahn had never intended for me to leave the operating room alive. I lowered my eyes. Fine. Victor's eyebrows lifted slightly. Fine. I'll take the case. For the first time that evening, satisfaction appeared in his eyes. Excellent. He reached for the file. I stopped him. I want the original imaging. Victor paused. The scans are already in the system. I know. My voice remained even. I want the raw imaging files, not the edited surgical presentation. A brief silence followed. One of the junior surgeons shifted uncomfortably. Victor smiled. You're being overly cautious. Maybe. I stood. But if I'm going to perform the surgery, I want to see everything. Victor stared at me for a second longer than necessary. Then he nodded. Of course. I walked out of the conference room without another word. The corridor outside was crowded with nurses, residents, and family members waiting for updates. The hospital smelled exactly as I remembered. Disinfectant, coffee, sterile gloves, fear. 3 years ago, I had walked through this same corridor believing I was about to save a man's life. Tonight, I walked through it knowing I was stepping into a trap. My reflection appeared in the glass doors. Same black hair, same tired eyes, same surgical scar near my left wrist. But something inside me had changed. In my previous life, I had been proud of my reputation for taking difficult cases. I had believed that if a patient needed me, I had no right to say no. That belief had nearly killed me. It had certainly destroyed me. I entered the surgeon's lounge and locked the door behind me. For several seconds, I simply stood there. My breathing became heavier. Memories came back with brutal clarity. The operating room, the alarms, the sudden drop in blood pressure, Victor shouting that I had made a mistake, the anesthesiologist screaming for blood, my assistant freezing, then the second rupture, then the accusation. Dr. Shun ignored protocol. Dr. Shun insisted on proceeding. Dr. Shun caused the patient's death. I remember the hospital board meeting, the humiliation, the reporters outside, my license suspension, and Victor's hand on my shoulder after everyone else had left. You should have listened to me. He had smiled. 2 days later, I had discovered the altered imaging report. By then it was too late. I had lost everything. My career, my mentor's trust, my father's faith in me, and finally my life. That night, I had driven home through a storm. A truck crossed the center line. Headlights, brakes, metal, darkness. Then, I opened my eyes 3 years earlier. I had spent the first 6 months believing it was impossible. The next 6 months wondering why I had been given another chance. Now I understood. It wasn't so I could save everyone. It was so I could finally stop sacrificing myself for people who had already decided I was disposable. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Shun. I opened the door. It was Mia Carter, one of the senior nurses. She looked worried. Victor says the surgery starts in 40 minutes. I know. She hesitated. You're really taking it? Yes. Her expression tightened. You know this is a nightmare case. I do. And Victor rejected 3 other surgeons before assigning it to you. I know that too. Mia lowered her voice. He's been talking about you all week. I looked at her. What did he say? That you're becoming arrogant. That you're taking too many risks. I almost smiled. In my previous life, those words had eventually appeared in the official report. This time, I wasn't going to argue with them. Thank you. Mia frowned. For what? For telling me. I picked up my coat. She watched me carefully. Are you scared? I thought about the operating room. The blood. The alarms. My own death. Yes. Her expression softened. But you're still going in. I looked toward the surgical wing. No. I corrected her quietly. I'm going in differently. At 8:11 p.m., I entered the operating room. Victor was already there. His surgical gown was immaculate. His expression was confident. The anesthesiologist nodded at me. Ready. I looked at the patient. Ethan Cole was unconscious beneath the surgical lights. In my previous life, I had felt desperate to save him. This time, I felt something colder. Not indifference. Clarity. I reached for the imaging screen. The first scan appeared. Then the second. My eyes narrowed. There it was. A tiny irregularity near the descending aorta. The same abnormality I had discovered only after the operation in my previous life. It hadn't been in the official file. Victor had hidden it. I looked at him. He was watching me. What? He asked. I smiled faintly. Nothing. Victor relaxed. He didn't know that his trap had just become my evidence. Let's begin. The operation started. And for the first 20 minutes, everything followed the memory in my head. The patient's pressure dropped. The nurses moved faster. Victor gave instructions. I followed them. Then I heard the anesthesiologist say the words I had been waiting for. Pressure is falling. My heart remained steady. Victor looked at me. Dr. Shun, proceed. I didn't move. Wait. His face hardened. What? I pointed at the monitor. Because the pressure pattern is wrong. The room went silent. Victor's eyes narrowed. You're delaying. No. I looked directly at him. I'm preventing the second rupture. His expression changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. Fear. Not concern for the patient. Fear that I had noticed. And suddenly I knew something else. Victor hadn't changed the plan. He had expected me to repeat my previous mistake. He had expected me to die exactly the same way. I lower my mask. Prepare the alternate clamp. Victor stared at me. That isn't in the plan. I know. Who authorized you to change the procedure? I met his eyes. I did. His jaw tightened. For the first time that night, he looked less like a chief surgeon and more like a man watching his carefully prepared trap collapse. Then the monitor screamed. The patient's pressure dropped sharply. Several nurses froze. Victor shouted, Dr. Shun, what did you do? I didn't answer. I had already seen this moment once. But this time, I knew what to do. Clamp. My voice cut through the panic. The scrub nurse moved instantly. Clamp. Victor stepped forward. Stop him. Nobody moved. He stared at me. You're going to rupture the vessel. No. I kept my eyes on the surgical field. You were going to. The room became unnaturally quiet. Victor's face went pale. What did you say? I didn't look at him. Retractor. The nurse handed it over. My hands moved with controlled precision. 3 years ago, my hands had trembled at this exact moment. Not because I lacked skill. Because Victor had been shouting behind me. Because everyone in the room had been looking at me. Because I had trusted him. This time, there was no hesitation. I corrected the position. Adjusted the pressure. Protected the vulnerable section. The monitor began to stabilize. Pressure is coming back, the anesthesiologist said. Nobody spoke. Victor stared at the screen. His breathing became shallow. I continued. 5 minutes later, the bleeding was controlled. 10 minutes later, Ethan's condition stabilized. The operation was no longer a disaster. It was simply difficult. Exactly what it should have been. I finished the procedure at 11:26 p.m. When I stepped away from the table, sweat had soaked the collar of my gown. Victor stood motionless. He had said almost nothing during the last hour. That was unusual. In my previous life, he had dominated every moment. This time, he had watched me take control. I removed my gloves. Patient is stable. The anesthesiologist nodded. Excellent work. Victor finally spoke. Dr. Shun. I turned. You changed the operative plan without approval. I did. You could have killed him. I studied his face. And if I had followed your plan? He didn't answer. The question hung between us. A nurse looked from him to me. Another quietly lowered her eyes. Victor recovered first. This isn't over. I know. He walked away. I watched him disappear through the doors. Mia approached me a few minutes later. You knew. I looked at her. Knew what? That something was wrong. I removed my surgical cap. I suspected. She shook her head. No. Her voice was quiet. You didn't suspect. You were waiting. I didn't respond. Because she was right. I had been waiting for the trap to reveal itself. But there was something else I had been waiting for. The moment Victor realized I wasn't the same man he had destroyed before. At 12:03 a.m., I went back to the surgeon's lounge. Instead of sleeping, I opened the hospital's internal system. I requested the raw imaging files. The system showed an access record. Victor Hahn, 6:52 p.m. My eyes narrowed. He had accessed the files before the case was assigned to me. That wasn't proof of malpractice, but it was a beginning. I downloaded the access history. Then I opened the surgical scheduling records. Victor had removed 2 senior surgeons from the emergency roster. Both had extensive experience with vascular complications. He had specifically left me as the only available surgeon. My chest tightened. This was no longer a feeling. It was a pattern. I kept digging. At 12:41 a.m., I found something that made me stop breathing. A hidden modification to the imaging archive. The raw scan had been uploaded at 4:18 p.m. The edited version had replaced it at 5:07 p.m. The account responsible belonged to Victor Hahn. I stared at the screen. In my previous life, I had discovered this too late. Tonight, I had found it before anyone knew there was anything to find. I copied everything. Not to my personal drive. Not to a USB. I sent encrypted copies to 2 independent locations outside the hospital network. Then I printed the access logs. I folded them carefully. The door opened. I turned. Victor stood there. His tie was loosened. His expression was tired, but his eyes were sharp. You're still here. So are you. He stepped inside. Tonight was impressive. I said nothing. He pulled out a chair. You know, Dr. Shun, I've always respected your hands. I leaned against the desk. That's an unusual compliment. Your technical ability is exceptional. He paused, which makes it unfortunate that you have such poor judgment. There it was, the familiar tone, the same manipulation. In my previous life, I had argued with him. Tonight I didn't. Victor noticed. You're not going to defend yourself? No. Why? Because you haven't accused me of anything yet. His eyes hardened. You changed the surgical plan and saved the patient. That doesn't erase the violation. I looked at him. Then report me. Silence. Victor hadn't expected that. He leaned forward. You think you're untouchable now? No. I folded my arms. I think if you have evidence, you should use it. His expression became unreadable. Then he smiled. Be careful, Shun. He stood. People who fight hospitals usually discover how small they really are. After he left, I remained still. My heart was beating quickly, not from fear, from recognition. That sentence had been almost identical to something he had told me in my previous life. Back then, I had fought him. This time I wouldn't. I would let him do what he had always done. He would keep creating evidence. He would keep believing I was trapped. And eventually, he would expose himself. At 2:15 a.m., I left the hospital. Rain fell over the parking lot. I stood beneath the awning, listening to the water hit the pavement. 3 years ago, I had driven home after this same surgery. This time, I walked toward a different car. For the first time since returning, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not victory, just certainty. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. I answered. Dr. Shun. Yes. A man's voice came through. I work in medical compliance. I was told you might have information regarding tonight's operation. I looked back at the hospital. The upper floors glowed against the dark sky. Who gave you my number? A pause. Then, someone who believes the official report from 3 years ago was false. My fingers tightened around the phone. 3 years. The exact phrase. The exact wound. Someone else knew. Who? We'll meet tomorrow. The call ended. I stood beneath the rain. For the first time since I had been given this second life, a question appeared that I hadn't expected. Maybe I wasn't the only one who remembered what Victor Hahn had done. And maybe the truth had been waiting for me long before I returned. The man waiting for me the next morning was not from the hospital. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the folder on the table between us. It was thick, too thick for a routine compliance inquiry. He stood when I entered the small cafe across from the medical district. Dr. Shun? Yes. Daniel Mercer, independent medical compliance investigator. He extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, his expression restrained. I sat opposite him. You said someone believed the report from 3 years ago was false. Daniel placed the folder in front of me. I said someone believes it. He opened it. The first page was a copy of my old disciplinary report. My stomach tightened. I had seen those words before. Gross procedural negligence. Failure to follow supervisory instruction. Contributing cause of patient death. I stared at the page. Daniel watched me carefully. You know this report? I know every line. Then you know what was missing. I looked up. What? The original imaging. My pulse slowed. Daniel slid another document across the table. Hospital archives claimed the raw images were corrupted. I said nothing. 3 years ago, he continued, the board accepted the edited imaging as the only surviving record. I studied him. And you don't believe that? No. Why? Because corrupted files don't leave a replacement trail. He pointed to the bottom of the page. There was a deletion request. Someone deliberately removed the original. My fingers rested against the paper. Who? That's what I'm trying to determine. I leaned back. Why involve me? Daniel hesitated. Because you were the surgeon standing in that operating room. I was also the surgeon everyone blamed. Yes. He closed the folder. And that's exactly why I wanted to speak with you. I looked through the cafe window. People hurried along the sidewalk, umbrellas opening beneath the morning rain. For a moment, I was back in that operating room. The alarms. Victor shouting. The accusation. My own hands covered in blood. I forced myself to look away. I can't help you. Daniel's eyebrows rose. You don't want the truth? I want the truth. Then why refuse? Because I learned something. What? I looked directly at him. Truth isn't useful if you don't have the right evidence. His expression changed. A faint smile appeared. Then perhaps we're looking for the same thing. I didn't answer. My phone vibrated. A message from the hospital. Emergency morbidity review scheduled. 2 p.m. attendance mandatory. Below it was Victor's name. Daniel noticed my expression. Problem? Victor Hahn. He nodded slowly. Then don't give him what he expects. I stood. What do you mean? He'll want you angry. I looked at him. I'm not angry. Daniel studied me for several seconds. No, he said quietly. You're something much more dangerous. I left without asking what he meant. At 1:52 p.m., I entered the review room. Victor was already seated at the head of the table. 7 people surrounded him. Hospital administrators, senior surgeons, a legal representative, and, at the far end, 2 reporters from the hospital's internal communications department. My eyes paused on them. Victor noticed. Dr. Shun, he said pleasantly. Sit. I sat. He opened a file. Last night's surgery was successful. No one reacted. Victor continued. However, several procedural concerns have been raised. A screen behind him lit up. My operative notes appeared. First, he said, you deviated from the approved surgical plan. I nodded. Yes. Several people looked at me. Victor's smile deepened. You admit it? Yes. And you understand that such deviation could constitute professional misconduct? If the deviation is unjustified. He paused. Was it justified? Yes. Based on what? The patient's condition, not according to the approved imaging. I looked at the screen. The edited scan appeared. There it was. The same missing abnormality. Victor had already inserted it into the review. I felt no surprise. He was moving exactly as expected. He wanted me to challenge the scan emotionally. He wanted me to accuse him without proof. He wanted me to look unstable. Instead, I said, I'd like to review the raw imaging. Victor's expression remained calm. There is no relevant raw imaging. I requested it last night. You requested a duplicate. No. I looked at him. I requested the original. Silence. The legal representative shifted in his chair. Victor's fingers tightened around his pen. We've already established that the original file was unavailable. Then I'd like that documented. Victor stared at me. Documented? Yes. I folded my hands on the table. Please write in the minutes that I formally requested the original imaging and was informed it was unavailable. Nobody spoke. Victor's face changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. He understood. I wasn't fighting him. I was making him record his own words. The hospital attorney cleared his throat. That can be included. Victor glanced at him, then back at me. Fine. He made a note. Anything else? Yes. I pushed a printed document across the table. Access logs. Victor looked down. His expression froze. The room became silent. These show that you accessed the patient's raw imaging at 6:52 p.m. before assigning the case to me. Victor slowly lifted his eyes. Those logs don't prove anything. No. I nodded. They don't. His shoulders relaxed slightly. I continued. But they prove you had access. The attorney reached for the document. Victor stopped him. There's nothing unusual about a chief surgeon reviewing a critical case. Of course. I leaned back. That is why I'm not accusing you. Victor stared at me. For the first time, uncertainty entered his eyes. I stood. The patient survived. I looked around the table. So, I suggest we focus on that. I walked out. Behind me, chairs moved. Voices rose. But I didn't turn around. I had finally learned something my previous life had never taught me. A person doesn't need to shout when the truth is already speaking. Outside the room, Mia was waiting. She looked at me anxiously. How bad was it? Not bad. You're lying. I smiled faintly. Probably. She lowered her voice. Victor is furious. I know. He told the nurses you're becoming difficult. That sounds familiar. Mia studied me. You're different. I looked at her. Different how? You used to explain yourself. I was silent. She continued. Now you just stop talking. I glanced toward the closed conference room doors. Sometimes explanations are wasted on people who have already decided what they want to believe. Mia didn't reply. Then she quietly handed me a small envelope. This was left at the nurse's station for you. I took it. No name. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. I stared at it. My blood ran cold. It showed Victor standing outside the hospital archive room 3 years ago. Beside him was the hospital's former data administrator. The same man who had later claimed the original imaging files were corrupted. On the back of the photograph were 6 words. You were never supposed to survive. I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Mia noticed my face. What is it? I turned the photograph over. Nothing. She frowned. You don't look like nothing. I'll handle it. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. I slipped the photograph into my coat. But my hands had already gone cold. Someone had been watching. Someone knew about the old case. And someone knew that my survival had disrupted a plan. I went straight to the archive department. The room was nearly empty. An elderly records clerk looked up. Can I help you? I need the access history for the vascular archive. Which patient? Ethan Cole. His expression changed. That's restricted. I know. He lowered his voice. Dr. Shun, that case is closed. It was closed 3 years ago. Yes. I don't think it should have been. He looked toward the hallway, then back at me. Wait here. 5 minutes later, he returned with a small terminal drive. I shouldn't be giving you this. I took it. Why are you? He swallowed. Because 3 years ago, I was told to delete something. My eyes narrowed. What? The backup directory. Who told you? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I already knew. Victor, what happened to the backup? The clerk shook his head. I didn't delete it. My heartbeat quickened. Where is it? He looked terrified. I don't know. Think. I moved it. Where? He glanced at the ceiling camera, then whispered, Old pathology storage. I thanked him and walked away. At the end of the corridor, I stopped. The old pathology storage room had been closed for almost 2 years. If the backup still existed, it could contain everything. The original scan, the deletion request, the access history. maybe even the altered report. I didn't go there immediately. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I returned to the operating wing. At 6:30 p.m., Victor approached me. "You've been asking questions." I looked up from my notes. "Have I?" "Don't play games." "I don't." He stood close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. "You think last night's surgery makes you untouchable?" "No." "Then stop digging into old matters." I looked at him. "Why?" His eyes hardened. "Because you're making enemies. I've had worse." He leaned closer. "You should be grateful I gave you the chance to return to the operating room." My fingers stopped moving. That sentence, that exact phrasing. 3 years ago, after my license suspension, Victor had said the same thing. "You should be grateful I gave you the chance." Back then, I had been devastated. Now, I understood what it meant. He wasn't simply trying to intimidate me. He believed he owned my career. He believed he had created my downfall once. And he intended to do it again. I closed my notebook. "Victor." "What?" "If you believe I violated hospital policy, report me." His expression darkened. "You really think you're clever?" "No." I stood. "I think you're predictable." For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he walked away. I watched him go. My heart was pounding. Not because I was afraid, because I had just seen something important. Victor was losing control, and men who were losing control made mistakes. At 9:17 p.m., I received another message. Pathology storage. Basement level. 11 p.m. Come alone. I stared at the screen. I should have ignored it. Instead, I went. Not because I trusted whoever sent it. Because I had already prepared. I told Mia where I was going. I sent Daniel a copy of the message. And I left my phone recording audio. At 10:58 p.m., the basement corridor was almost completely dark. The old pathology storage room smelled of dust and disinfectant. I unlocked the door. Inside were boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. I switched on the flashlight. "Where are you?" No answer. I stepped farther inside. A box near the back had a handwritten label. EC, Thor, 17. Ethan Cole. I knelt. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was an old external storage drive. I stared at it. 3 years. 3 years of believing the truth had been destroyed. And it was sitting in my hands. A sound came from behind me. I turned. The door slammed shut. The room went dark. I heard footsteps. Then a voice. "You should have left it alone." "Victor." I didn't move. His footsteps approached slowly. "You always were too stubborn." I switched on my flashlight. He stood several meters away. No surgical gown. No polished smile. Just a tired man with anger in his eyes. "You followed me," I said. "I followed the drive." I looked at it. "So that's what you're afraid of." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then explain it." "You think this is about one patient?" I remained silent. Victor laughed bitterly. "You really don't remember." The word struck me. "Remember what?" He stepped closer. "The night you died." My blood stopped. He knew. Not that I had returned, but he knew I had died. He saw my reaction and smiled. "You finally understand." I couldn't speak. Victor continued. 3 years ago, you were supposed to take the blame. For what? For everything. He looked toward the storage drive. You were convenient. My hands tightened. And the patient? Victor's expression became cold. The patient was never the point. A terrible silence filled the room. Then he said, "The point was the research." I stared at him. "What research?" He smiled. And for the first time, I realized the case I had remembered as a simple act of malpractice had been connected to something much larger. Something that had nothing to do with one patient's death. Victor stepped closer. "Open the drive." I looked at him. "No." His expression changed. "You don't have a choice." I held the drive against my chest. "You're right." I pressed a button on my phone. The recording indicator was still blinking. "But neither do you." Victor froze. I smiled for the first time that night. "Because someone else has already heard everything you just said." His face drained of color. Victor did not move. For 3 seconds, the only sound in the basement was the faint electrical hum from the ceiling. Then his eyes dropped to my phone. "You're bluffing." "No." I held his gaze. "You just admitted that I was supposed to take the blame." His face hardened. "You think an audio recording is enough to destroy me?" "I don't know." I slipped the storage drive into my coat. "But I don't need to destroy you." Victor laughed. You still don't understand. He stepped toward me. The hospital protects its own. Then why are you afraid? His expression went still. That was my answer. He was afraid. Not of me. Of what was inside the drive. Victor reached for the door. Give me that. I didn't move. Why? Because you don't know what you're carrying. Then tell me. He looked at me for a long moment. You're making the same mistake again. I frowned. What mistake? Thinking this is about you. Then he opened the door and walked out. I remained in the storage room. My heartbeat was loud enough to hear. I took out my phone. The recording was intact. But I wasn't satisfied. Victor's words had confirmed something important. The Ethan Cole case had not been an isolated act of malpractice. There had been research. I needed to know what kind. At 11:37 p.m., I returned to my apartment. I didn't sleep. I connected the storage drive to an old laptop that had never been connected to the hospital network. The folder opened. Hundreds of files appeared. Patient data, surgical measurements, blood samples, post-operative reports. My eyes moved rapidly across the screen. Then I saw the project name. Project Helix. I clicked it. A spreadsheet opened. Patient numbers, dates, genetic markers, experimental treatment responses. My stomach tightened. This wasn't ordinary clinical research. Some of these patients had never consented to experimental procedures. I opened another file. The principal investigator was listed at the top. Victor Hahn, MD. Underneath him were two additional names. One was the hospital's former medical director. The other made me stop. Dr. Adrian Shun. My father. I stared at the screen. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. My father had died 2 years before my previous life ended. He had spent his final years believing my medical career had been destroyed by my own arrogance. I had believed that too, but his name was here. Project Helix. My hand trembled as I opened the next document. It was dated 12 years earlier. The first line read, Initial Vascular Response Study, S, Family Cohort. I leaned back. S, family. My family. I kept reading. The research involved a rare hereditary vascular condition. My father's condition. My mother's. Mine. The room seemed to tilt. I had always believed my father died from a sudden cardiac event. But the document contained a different explanation. His medical history had been used as the foundation for a private research program. And Victor had been involved from the beginning. I closed my eyes. My father had once told me, medicine is not about proving that you're the smartest person in the room. I had laughed. He had smiled. It is about knowing which lives you are responsible for. Now his words felt different. Maybe he had known. Maybe he tried to warn me. A notification appeared. New encrypted message. Daniel, I found something. Don't access the Helix files through the hospital. I stared at the message. Then another arrived. Someone has been monitoring your account. I immediately disconnected the laptop from the internet. Too late. The screen flickered. A file appeared that I hadn't opened. Read me. I clicked it. One sentence appeared. Your father knew why they chose you. My breathing stopped. I sat there until the screen blurred. Then my phone rang. Daniel. I answered. Where are you? At home. Are you alone? Yes. Lock the door. I stood immediately. What? I've been looking into Victor's financial records. And there are payments going to a private research company. What company? Helix Medical Research. I looked at the laptop. What did you find? A shell company connected to Victor. Anything else? Silence. Then Daniel said, there are payments from the same company to your father's old foundation. My knees weakened. My father had a foundation? Yes. I sat down. No one told me, because it was dissolved after his death. Who dissolved it? Victor. The room became silent. I closed my eyes. The pieces were beginning to connect. Victor hadn't simply destroyed my career. He had controlled information about my family. He had buried research. He had manipulated medical records. And 3 years ago, when I discovered the altered imaging, he had needed someone to blame. Me. Daniel. Yes. Do you know what happened to my father? I've been trying to find out. No. My voice became quiet. I think I know where to start. The next morning, I went to my father's old house. It had been sold after his death, but the storage unit remained under my name. I hadn't opened it in years. The manager led me to a narrow room at the back. Dust covered everything. Old books, medical journals, photographs. My father's handwriting appeared everywhere. I opened a wooden drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope. My name was written across it. Elias. My throat tightened. I opened it. A single handwritten page lay inside. If you were reading this, then I was unable to tell you everything. I stopped. My hands began shaking. There are people in medicine who stopped seeing patients as human beings. They see data, results, opportunities. I swallowed. Victor Hahn is one of them. My eyes moved down the page. If he ever asked you to take responsibility for something you did not do not fight him publicly. I froze. The advice was exactly what I had been doing. Let him speak. Let him create records. Let him become confident. People reveal themselves when they believe they have already won. I lowered the letter. My father had known. Not everything, but enough. At the bottom was one final sentence. And if you ever get another chance to choose yourself. I sat on the dusty floor. For the first time since returning to this life, tears filled my eyes. I had spent years believing I had failed my father. Maybe I hadn't. Maybe I had simply misunderstood his silence. A sound came from outside the storage room. I immediately stood. Someone was walking down the corridor. Slowly, I folded the letter and put it inside my coat. The footsteps stopped outside. A knock sounded. Elias. I froze. That voice. I hadn't heard in years. My father's former research assistant, Dr. Laura Bennett. I opened the door. Laura stood outside with a gray coat pulled tightly around her. She looked older than I remembered. Her eyes moved over my face. Then she whispered, "You look exactly like him." I stepped aside. "Come in." She entered. Her gaze fell on the storage boxes. "You found the letter. How did you know?" "Because I helped your father write it." I stared at her. "You knew." "I knew some of it. Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes lowered. "Because Victor threatened everyone who worked on the project." "Did he threaten my father?" Laura hesitated. "Worse." I felt my chest tighten. "What did he do?" "He convinced your father that the research could save people with your family's condition." I frowned. "And at first, your father believed him." She walked toward the boxes. "Then he discovered what Victor was really doing." "What?" "Victor wasn't only studying the disease." Laura looked at me. "He was trying to identify people who could be manipulated into experimental treatment without understanding the risks." I stared at her. "My father found out." "Yes." "And he tried to stop him." "He tried." Her voice cracked. Victor had already built too many relationships inside the hospital. I looked down at the letter. Did my father die because of him? Laura didn't answer immediately. That silence was enough. My jaw tightened. "Tell me." She closed her eyes. "Your father's final medical report was altered." The room became silent. "What did it originally say?" "Acute vascular collapse." I stared at her. "That sounds like the condition." "It was." "Then what's wrong with it?" Laura looked at me. "Nothing." I frowned. "Nothing. The problem is what caused it." She reached into her bag. I kept a copy. She handed me an old medical report. I unfolded it. There was a handwritten note in the margin. "Possible exposure to experimental anticoagulant." My eyes widened. "Experimental anticoagulant?" Laura nodded. "Your father had been testing a treatment developed under Helix. On himself. He believed it was safe. And it wasn't." "No." I stared at the document. "Why wasn't this in his official report?" "Because Victor removed it." I closed my eyes. A strange calm settled over me. The pieces finally made sense. My father had discovered the truth. Victor had erased it. Then, years later, Victor had manipulated me into becoming the perfect scapegoat. I opened my eyes. "Why are you helping me now?" Laura smiled sadly. "Because I'm tired. Tired of being afraid." She looked toward the door. "And because I made a mistake." "What mistake?" "I believe staying silent would protect people." She took a breath. "It didn't." I said nothing. She continued. "Your father asked me once to expose Victor. And you didn't." "No." "Why?" "Because I had children." Her voice shook. "I was afraid he'd destroy their lives." I nodded slowly. I understood. Fear could make good people silent. But silence didn't make evil disappear. It only gave it room. Laura stood. "I have one more thing." She took out a small key. "Your father kept a second archive." "Where?" "The old research wing." I looked at the key. That building was demolished. The building was. She smiled faintly. The underground archive wasn't. That evening, Daniel joined us. The three of us stood outside the abandoned research wing. The building was dark, windows broken, weeds growing through the pavement. Daniel looked at me. You sure? No. He smiled. Good answer. We entered through a side door. The underground archive was behind a rusted steel panel. The key worked. Inside were rows of old cabinets. Laura walked directly to one. Your father used this. She pulled out a box. Inside were patient consent forms, financial documents, research notes, and photographs. I opened one. Victor stood beside several doctors. My father was in the background. Another photograph showed the same group years later. My father was gone. Victor remained. I opened a notebook. My father's handwriting filled the pages. Most were medical observations. Then one sentence stopped me. Victor has begun selecting patients based on genetic vulnerability rather than clinical necessity. I turned the page. If I disappear, the evidence is here. I looked at Daniel. We have enough. He shook his head. No. I frowned. Why? Because evidence is only useful if it survives the person holding it. He pointed toward the ceiling. Victor knows we're looking. Ow! Daniel showed me his phone. A message had appeared. Stop searching. Then another. Or the next report will not be about your career. I stared at the screen. My fear returned for the first time. Not for myself. For Laura. For Daniel. For everyone connected to this. I closed the notebook. We stopped. Daniel looked surprised. What? We stopped searching. Laura stared at me. You're giving up? No. I looked at the evidence. We already have what we need. Then what are you going to do? I closed the box. Nothing. Daniel frowned. Nothing. I nodded. We let Victor think he won. Laura understood first. Her eyes widened. You want him to make another move? Yes. Daniel slowly smiled. He'll try to destroy the evidence. Exactly. And if he does? I looked at the boxes. Then he'll have to reveal exactly what he's afraid of. 3 days later, Victor called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't surprised. When I entered the room, he was standing beside a presentation screen. My name was displayed in large letters. Dr. Elias Shun, Professional Conduct Review. Victor turned toward me. Thank you for coming. I took my seat. He smiled. You know, Elias, I really hoped you would make this easier. I said nothing. He clicked the remote. A document appeared. It was an accusation that I had deliberately altered the surgical plan during Ethan Cole's operation. The room filled with murmurs. Victor looked at me. Do you have anything to say? I leaned back. No. His smile widened. He thought I was cornered. He didn't know that I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to defend myself. Not yet. I was going to let him finish. I was going to let him show everyone exactly how far he was willing to go. And somewhere beneath the hospital, the evidence he believed had been destroyed was waiting. Victor clicked to the next slide. A timeline appeared. Every event from the Ethan Cole surgery had been arranged to make me look reckless. 8:11 p.m. I entered the operating room. 8:32 p.m. I altered the surgical plan. 8:34 p.m. The patient's blood pressure dropped. 8:36 p.m. I performed an unauthorized intervention. Victor had even highlighted the words unauthorized intervention in red. He turned toward the board. This isn't about personal conflict, he said. It's about patient safety. I almost laughed. Instead, I folded my hands. The hospital director, Margaret Lewis, looked at me. Dr. Shun, do you dispute these records? No. Victor's eyebrows lifted. No, I don't dispute the timeline. A murmur passed through the room. Victor looked pleased. Then you admit you violated procedure. I didn't say that. His smile disappeared. I continued calmly. The timeline is incomplete. Margaret leaned forward. Ow! It doesn't show the information available to me before I change the procedure. Victor immediately interrupted. That information wasn't available in the official record. I looked at him. Exactly. The room fell silent. Margaret's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? I turned toward the screen. The official record contains an edited imaging file. Victor's expression changed. Only slightly. But everyone saw it. He recovered quickly. That is an allegation. Yes. I nodded. and I have not made it an accusation. Victor frowned. Then what are you doing? Waiting. For what? I looked at Margaret. For the original. Victor laughed. There is no original. I said nothing. Margaret looked at the hospital attorney. Can we verify that? The attorney nodded. The archive indicates the original file was corrupted. I glanced at Victor. Corrupted? Yes. On what date? The attorney checked his tablet. October 14th. I smiled faintly. That is interesting. Victor stiffened. What's interesting? The file was accessed on October 14th. That doesn't prove anything. No. I agreed. It doesn't. Then I placed the document on the table. But this does. Margaret picked it up. Her eyes moved across the page. What is this? An archive access report. She looked toward the attorney. Is this authentic? He scanned it. His expression changed. I believe so. Victor stepped forward. Where did you get that? I looked at him. You asked me to defend myself. I didn't ask you to bring unauthorized documents. You didn't ask me not to. The room became tense. Victor's voice hardened. You've been investigating internal records without authorization. Yes. You admit it? Yes. He turned toward Margaret. You see? This is exactly what I mean. I remained silent. Victor thought he was winning. Then Margaret asked, why does the access report show that Dr. Han opened the raw imaging file before assigning the case to Dr. Shin? Victor froze. Nobody spoke. He looked at the report, then at me, then at Margaret. Routine review. Margaret's voice sharpened. At 6:52 p.m. Yes. More than an hour before surgery? Yes. Why? Victor hesitated. I wanted to assess the case. Then why was the original file later marked corrupted? I don't know. I watched him carefully. His confidence was beginning to crack. Margaret turned toward me. Do you have anything else? I shook my head. No. Victor stared at me. He understood. I had given the board just enough. Not everything. Enough to make them ask questions. That was more dangerous than an accusation. After the meeting, Victor followed me into the corridor. His footsteps were fast. Stop. I kept walking. Elias. I turned. He stood several feet away. His face was no longer controlled. You think you've won? No. You think the board will protect you? No. Then why are you smiling? I realized I was. I'm not. You are. I looked at him. Maybe I'm just relieved. Relieved about what? That you're finally asking the questions I wanted you to ask. His face went pale. What does that mean? I stepped closer. You'll find out. Then I walked away. That night, Margaret called me. Come to my office. I arrived at 9:10 p.m. She closed the door. I've known Victor for 15 years. I know. He's difficult. He's worse than difficult. Margaret looked tired. I've suspected irregularities for years. I said nothing. But suspicion isn't enough. No. Do you have proof? I looked at her. Yes. Her eyes sharpened. Why didn't you show it today? Because Victor is not the only person involved. She stared at me. What do you mean? Someone inside the hospital has been helping him. Margaret's face hardened. Boo, I don't know yet. Then what do you want? I want an independent investigation. She was silent. You're asking me to expose the hospital. I'm asking you to protect it. Margaret looked away. After a long pause, she said, I'll authorize an external audit. Thank you, Elias. I stopped at the door. If this is what you think it is, you may not be able to come back from it. I looked over my shoulder. I already died once because I trusted the wrong people. Margaret stared at me. I left before she could ask what I meant. The next morning, Victor made his move. An internal notice appeared on every hospital terminal. Dr. Elias Shun suspended pending investigation. I read it without emotion. Mia found me in the locker room. They suspended you. I know. Are you okay? Yes. You don't look okay. I smiled. I don't need to look okay. She lowered her voice. Victor is celebrating. Let him. You're really going to do nothing? I looked at her. For now. She shook her head. I don't understand you anymore. I didn't understand myself before. She frowned. I picked up my coat. What are you going to do? Go home. That's it. Yes. She watched me leave. Outside, reporters were waiting. Questions came from every direction. Dr. Shun, did you violate surgical protocol? Did you falsify medical records? Is it true the patient nearly died because of you? I kept walking. No defense. No argument. No statement. Victor watched from the hospital entrance. He expected me to panic. Instead, I called Daniel. It started. His voice was calm. Good. I'm suspended. I know. What about the evidence? Safe. I look back at the hospital. Then we wait. For what? I watched Victor turn away from the reporters. For him to become careless. 3 days passed. Victor became more confident with every hour. His allies began speaking to the press. Anonymous statements appeared online. Senior surgeon under investigation for reckless conduct. Hospital sources questioned Dr. Shun's judgment. Patient safety concerns ignored by ambitious surgeon. I read none of them twice. My suspension gave me something I had never possessed in my previous life. Distance. I could finally watch. And from a distance, patterns became obvious. Victor stopped being cautious. He started deleting files. Daniel sent me screenshots of system activity. 3 archive folders accessed last night. By whom? Victor. Which folders? Ethan Cole. Project Helix. Your father's research. I smiled. He's cleaning. Yes. Let him. Daniel paused. You're sure? Yes. Because my father had been right. People reveal themselves when they believed they had already won. On the 4th night, Victor accessed the hidden archive. Daniel's system had recorded every movement. At 1:14 a.m., someone entered the old pathology storage room. At 1:19, the external drive containing Project Helix was removed. At 1:23, the archive camera went offline. At 1:27, a second person entered. We didn't know who. Then the hospital system captured a badge number. Dr. Victor Hahn. And beneath it, Margaret Lewis. I stared at the screen. Daniel looked at me. That's strange. Very. Why would the director be there? I didn't answer. The next morning, Margaret called. Come to the hospital. I can't. I'm suspended. Then come through the side entrance. I arrived an hour later. Margaret was waiting in a private office. She looked exhausted. I know what you're thinking. I don't know what to think. Good. She closed the blinds. I went to the archive last night. Why? To see whether Victor was deleting evidence. And he was. Did you stop him? No. I looked at her. Why? Because I wanted him to believe I was helping him. I understood. You were recording him. She nodded. Everything. I sat down. Margaret opened a drawer. Inside was a recorder. He spoke for 23 minutes. What did he say? That the Helix project was never supposed to become public. My expression tightened. What else? He admitted altering your father's records. I went completely still. Did he say why? He said your father became a liability. My hands curled into fists. Margaret watched me. There's more. She placed another document on the desk. A payment ledger. Victor wasn't acting alone. I scanned the names. Hospital executives. Private investors. Research companies. Then I saw one name. James Cole. I looked up. Ethan Cole's father? Yes. That doesn't make sense. Margaret nodded. That's what I thought. James Cole had been the grieving father in my previous life. He had stood outside the operating room. He had screamed at me. He had called me a murderer. And now his name was on a payment ledger connected to Helix. Margaret spoke quietly. He was paying Victor. My chest tightened. For what? We don't know yet. I remembered Ethan lying unconscious beneath the surgical lights. Maybe the surgery had never been the real story. Maybe the patient had been selected long before he entered that operating room. I stood. I need to meet James Cole. Margaret nodded. He requested a meeting with you. When? Tonight. At 7 p.m., I arrived at a private restaurant. James was sitting alone. He looked older than I remembered. When he saw me, he stood. Dr. Shun. Mr. Cole. He gestured toward the chair. Sit. I sat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, My son is alive because of you. I looked at him. I did what any surgeon should do. No. His eyes reddened. You did what you weren't supposed to do. I frowned. What does that mean? He lowered his voice. Victor told me you would follow the original plan. My body went still. He expected me to die? James nodded. My son was supposed to die. Why? Because he had the genetic marker. My heart sank. Helix. Yes. James looked down. I was paid to keep quiet. You accepted money? I I was told it was for treatment. His voice broke. I didn't know what they were doing. I stared at him. Then why did you accuse me? He closed his eyes. Victor told me if I didn't, my daughter would lose her medical care. Silence. I understood then. Victor didn't only control doctors. He controlled families. He controlled fear. James wiped his face. I hated you. I know. I believed you killed my son. I know. He looked at me. I'm sorry. I shook my head. Don't apologize to me. He looked confused. Then who? Your son. James lowered his head. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Then he placed a small envelope on the table. This came from Victor. I opened it. Inside was a copy of contract. The final page contained a signature. Victor Hahn. And underneath it, termination of Project Helix, subject EC. My eyes narrowed. The date was the night of Ethan's surgery. The document had been prepared before the operation. Victor had already planned the patient's death. I slowly placed it on the table. James whispered, "Can you stop it?" I looked at the signature. Yes. He stared at me. Ow! I folded the document. I won't. James looked shocked. What? I won't stop him. I stood. I'll let him finish. Because now I understood the final piece. Victor wasn't simply trying to destroy my career. He was trying to erase Project Helix. And every time he moved against me, he was leaving another trail. I walked out of the restaurant. My phone rang. Daniel. Elias. Yes. We have a problem. What? The external auditor arrived. And someone leaked the entire investigation file. My footsteps stopped. Where? To every major medical regulator in the country. I looked at the city lights. Who leaked it? Daniel was silent. Then, your name is attached. I closed my eyes. Victor had made his final mistake. He had tried to destroy me publicly. Instead, he had just made the entire country look at what he wanted hidden. And this time, I was ready to let everyone watch. By sunrise, the hospital gates were surrounded by cameras. News vans lined the street. Reporters stood beneath umbrellas, shouting questions at anyone who walked through the entrance. Project Helix investigation expands. Hospital executives questioned. Surgeon suspension connected to secret research program. I watched the headlines from my apartment. My name appeared in nearly every article. But for once, it wasn't beside the word negligence. It was beside whistleblower. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. My phone rang. Daniel, the regulator wants to meet you. When? Today. Who else? Victor. I closed my eyes. Of course. There will be investigators, hospital representatives, and legal counsel. Good. Daniel hesitated. Elias. Yes. You don't have to do this alone. I looked toward the kitchen. For years, I had believed strength meant carrying everything myself. My father had taught me responsibility. But somewhere along the way, I had confused responsibility with isolation. I know, I said. At noon, I entered the regulatory hearing room. Victor was already there. He looked different. His suit was wrinkled. His hair was uncombed. The confidence that had once seemed permanent was gone. He looked at me. I took the seat across from him. He whispered, "You did this." I looked at him. No. His eyes narrowed. You leaked the files. No. Then who? I shrugged. You should ask the person who had access. His jaw tightened. The hearing began. The lead investigator placed a recorder on the table. Dr. Hahn, we have evidence suggesting Project Helix involved unauthorized experimental treatment and manipulation of patient records. Victor leaned forward. I deny that. The investigator continued. We also have financial records linking you to private research companies. I received legitimate research funding and payments to your personal accounts. Victor's face hardened. Consulting fees. From a company that received hospital contracts? Yes. The investigator looked at me. Dr. Shun, when did you first become aware of Project Helix? I answered honestly. After my father's death. Did you participate? No. Did you ever knowingly perform experimental treatment on Ethan Cole? No. Then why did you alter the surgical plan? Because the official imaging omitted a life-threatening abnormality. The investigator turned toward Victor. Did you know about that abnormality? Victor remained silent. Dr. Hahn, I reviewed the case. Did you? Yes. Then why was it missing from the official imaging? I don't know. I placed my hands on the table. You don't have to answer. Everyone looked at me. I continued. The archive can answer. The investigator nodded. Show us. A technician connected a drive. The screen displayed the original imaging. Then the edited version. Side by side. The missing abnormality was obvious. A murmur passed through the room. Victor stared at the screen. The investigator turned to him. Who altered this file? Victor shook his head. I don't know. Another file appeared. Access log. Victor's account. 6:52 p.m. Then the deletion request. Victor's account. 7:07 p.m. Then another record. Emergency surgical assignment. Dr. Elias Shun. Victor's face went pale. This is being manipulated. No, I said quietly. This is what you left behind. He looked at me. His eyes held something I had never seen before. Fear. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. The investigator asked. Dr. Hahn, do you deny accessing the file? I reviewed it. Do you deny deleting the original? I didn't delete anything. Then who did? I don't know. A voice came from the back of the room. I do. Everyone turned. Laura Bennett stepped forward. Victor's face collapsed. You. Laura walked to the table. I worked under Dr. Hahn for 11 years. Her hands trembled, but I kept copies. Victor stood abruptly. This is absurd. Security approached him. He stopped. The investigator looked at Laura. What do you have? She placed a folder on the table. Original research notes. Then another. Financial records. Then another. Patient consent forms. Finally, she placed down a small recorder. And his confession. Victor stared at her. You promised. Laura looked at him. I promised to protect my children. Her voice was quiet. I never promised to protect you. The recording began. Victor's voice filled the room. The patient was never the point. Then, you were supposed to take the blame. The room became silent. Victor's shoulders dropped. I listened without satisfaction. I had imagined this moment many times in my previous life. I had imagined shouting, anger, revenge. But now, sitting across from him, I felt only exhaustion. The investigator stopped the recording. Dr. Hahn, you are being placed under immediate investigation for medical fraud, falsification of records, unauthorized experimentation, and obstruction. Victor looked at me. Elias. I met his eyes. You know, I never wanted this. I almost laughed. Neither did I. He shook his head. You don't understand. I understand enough. You think this ends with me? No. His expression changed. I continued. It ends with everyone who participated. He looked toward the door. For the first time, Victor Hahn had nowhere to go. The investigation lasted 6 months. 6 months of hearings, audits, interviews, medical reviews. Families came forward. Some were angry. Some were confused. Some simply wanted answers. Project Helix was dismantled. The hospital board resigned. Several private companies lost their licenses. Victor was charged, and I was officially cleared of every allegation connected to Ethan Cole's surgery. But none of it felt like victory. One afternoon, I stood outside Ethan's hospital room. He was awake. He had been transferred to rehabilitation months earlier. He looked at me and smiled. Dr. Shun, Ethan, you saved me. I shook my head. You did most of the surviving. He laughed softly. My father told me everything. I sat beside his bed. How are you feeling? Angry. I nodded. That makes sense. He said he believed I was going to die. He was afraid. So was I. I looked at him. Fear doesn't make people weak. He smiled. You sound like my father. I smiled back. He would probably argue with me about that. For a while, we sat in silence. Then Ethan asked, Are you going back to surgery? I looked through the window. The afternoon sunlight touched the hospital courtyard. I don't know. You're a good surgeon. That isn't the same as being happy. He nodded. I understand. I stood. Rest. As I left the room, I realized something. For the first time, I wasn't measuring my worth by whether someone needed me in an operating room. That was new and frightening, but also peaceful. A week later, I resigned from the hospital. Margaret met me outside her office. You don't have to leave. I know. You could become department chief. I smiled. That's exactly why I should leave. She laughed quietly. You really don't want the title? I spent one lifetime chasing it. She looked at me. One lifetime? I paused, then smiled. Figure of speech. Margaret nodded. She handed me an envelope. Your father's research foundation. I looked at it. What about it? It was never legally dissolved. My eyes widened. What? Victor filed the paperwork incorrectly. I laughed. Even after everything, Victor had managed to leave one final mistake behind. Margaret continued. The foundation still owns several research grants. I looked at the envelope. What do you want me to do with them? Whatever your father wanted. That evening, I opened the foundation documents. There was a handwritten mission statement. Research should make patients safer, not make patients useful. I read it twice. Then I smiled. I knew what I wanted. 3 months later, I opened a small independent surgical research center. No giant marble entrance. No impressive executive floor. Just laboratories, training rooms, a patient education center, and a rule posted on every operating room door. No patient becomes data until they become a person first. Mia joined me. Daniel helped establish the compliance department. Laura became our ethics advisor. None of us talked much about Victor anymore. We didn't need to. His name had become a warning rather than a threat. One evening, Mia found me in the empty training room. You're still here. So are you. She smiled. I brought coffee. I accepted the cup. Thank you. She sat beside me. You seem different. I looked at her. Again. Yes. Ow. You're not always looking over your shoulder. I thought about it. She was right. For years, I had lived as though danger were always coming. Now, for the first time, I could sit in silence without expecting an alarm. I think I'm finally tired of being afraid. Mia smiled. Good. We sat quietly. Outside, the city lights flickered. My phone vibrated. A message from Daniel. Victor's final hearing is tomorrow. I looked at the screen, then locked my phone. Mia noticed. You aren't going? No. Why? Because it's no longer my story. She smiled. That's probably the healthiest thing you've said all year. I laughed. Maybe she was right. I had spent my previous life believing closure required seeing the person who hurt me fall. Now I understood something different. Closure wasn't watching someone lose everything. It was realizing you no longer needed anything from them. That night, I walked through the research center alone. The lights were dim. The operating rooms were empty. No alarms. No shouting. No accusations. Just silence. I placed my hand against the glass door of the first operating room. 3 years ago, I had died believing my career was my entire life. When I returned, I thought my purpose was revenge. I had been wrong twice. My life wasn't about proving Victor wrong. It wasn't even about proving myself right. It was about becoming someone who could walk into a difficult room and still choose what was right. I turned off the lights. Then I left. Behind me, the research center remained quiet. Ahead of me was a city I had once believed I had lost forever. This time, I wasn't returning to the past. I was finally walking toward my own future. The final hearing began at 9 in the morning. I had no intention of attending. Then, at 8:17, a message arrived from Laura. You should come. Not for Victor. For your father. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I put on my coat. The courthouse was crowded when I arrived. Reporters filled the entrance. Former hospital employees stood in small groups. Families who had once been connected to Project Helix waited quietly in the hallway. I kept my head down. A reporter recognized me. Dr. Shun, are you here to testify? No. Do you want Victor Hahn punished? I stopped. The old version of me would have answered immediately. The new version thought about it. I want the truth recorded correctly. Then I walked inside. Victor was brought into the courtroom 10 minutes later. He looked thinner, older. The arrogance was gone. He noticed me. For a moment, our eyes met. He gave a bitter smile. You came. Yes. I thought you wouldn't. I almost didn't. He looked down. Why did you? I sat across from him. Someone asked me to. My father. I didn't answer. The judge entered. The room fell silent. The proceedings began. Evidence was presented. Financial transfers. Medical records. Research documents. Patient statements. Audio recordings. One by one, the structure Victor had built collapsed. But then his attorney stood. There is still one unresolved issue. The courtroom became quiet. He turned toward me. Dr. Shun, You were the surgeon responsible for Ethan Cole's operation. Yes. You changed the surgical plan. Yes. You acted without prior authorization. Yes. And yet you claim that decision saved the patient. Yes. Why should anyone believe you? I looked at him. Because the patient's medical record shows he survived. The attorney frowned. That's not proof of intent. No. I nodded. It isn't. Then what is? I looked toward the judge. The truth is that I didn't know whether my decision would save him. The courtroom became silent. I only knew the original plan placed him in greater danger. The attorney approached. So you admit you took a risk? Yes. Isn't that exactly what Victor Hahn accused you of? I smiled faintly. Yes. He seemed pleased. Then perhaps the original disciplinary report wasn't entirely wrong. No. My smile disappeared. It was wrong about why. The attorney paused. I continued. I took the risk because the patient needed it. I looked at Ethan, who was sitting behind the prosecution. He wasn't a research subject. My voice remained steady. He wasn't a statistic. He was a person. The attorney said nothing. I turned toward the judge. And that was the difference between us. Victor looked at me. His eyes were wet. I didn't know whether it was regret, fear, or exhaustion. It didn't matter. The judge called a recess. I walked outside. The courthouse steps were crowded. Ethan came after me. You didn't have to say that. Yes, I did. He smiled. My father would have liked you. I looked at him. He already hated me once. He was wrong. I laughed softly. He knows that now. Ethan looked toward the courtroom. Are you staying? No. Why? Because my part is finished. He nodded. Before I could leave, someone called my name. Dr. Shun. I turned. Victor stood at the courthouse entrance with 2 officers beside him. He looked at me. Can I speak to you? I hesitated, then nodded. We walked to a quiet corner. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Victor said, I used to think you were weak. I looked at him. You were wrong. Yes. He looked down. I thought because you cared so much about patients, you could be controlled. You were right about one thing. He raised his eyes. I did let people control me. He swallowed. But you made the mistake of believing that would last forever. I didn't answer. He looked toward the street. I destroyed your career. Yes. I destroyed your father's research. Yes. I made people hate you. Yes. His voice broke. I thought if I took everything from you, you would become like me. I stared at him. Did it work? He gave a weak smile. No. I shook my head. That was your greatest failure. The officers approached. Victor looked at me one last time. Do you forgive me? The question surprised me. I thought about it. No. His expression fell. But I don't hate you. He looked confused. I continued. Forgiveness isn't something you get to ask for when consequences finally arrive. He lowered his head. I walked away. Behind me, I heard the officers escort him inside. I didn't turn around. 1 year later, the first trainee at our surgical center stood in front of me with shaking hands. Dr. Shun. Yes. The patient is deteriorating. I looked at the monitor. Blood pressure falling. Heart rate rising. The young surgeon waited for my instruction. What do we do? I studied the scan. Then I looked at him. What do you think? He swallowed. I think we need to change the plan. Why? Because the original approach won't address the actual source of bleeding. I nodded. Then change it. He hesitated. Without approval, I smiled. With justification. He nodded and moved. The room became busy. Nurses prepared equipment. The anesthesiologist adjusted medication. The trainee took control. I stayed beside him. Not because I didn't trust him, because I did. 20 minutes later, the patient's condition stabilized. The trainee exhaled. Thank you. I shook my head. You made the decision. But you let me. That is what teaching is. He looked at me. I thought surgeons were supposed to know everything. I laughed. No surgeon knows everything. I glanced at the operating room. The dangerous ones are the people who believe they do. After the surgery, I stepped outside. The evening sky was clear. Daniel was waiting near the entrance. You have a visitor. Who? He pointed toward the courtyard. Ethan stood there. He was walking without assistance now. When he saw me, he smiled. You're busy. Always. He handed me a small package. What is this? My father sent it before his death. I looked at him. I thought you said he had nothing left. He didn't. Ethan smiled. This was in an old safety deposit box. I opened the package. Inside was a photograph. My father, me, and a young Victor Hahn, all three standing together at a medical conference. On the back, my father had written, "Medicine changes when good people refuse to remain silent." I stared at the words. Ethan watched me. "You okay?" I smiled. Yes. And I was. Not because the past had disappeared. It hadn't. Some scars remained. Some memories would always hurt. But they no longer controlled me. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the center. The same place where we had treated hundreds of patients. The same place where young surgeons learned to question assumptions. On the wall near the entrance was a photograph of my father. Beneath it were 3 words. Patients are people. I stood there for a long time. Then I remembered the night I had first returned. Victor had given me an impossible case. He had expected me to panic. He had expected me to fail. He had expected the same man who died once to walk into the operating room again. He was wrong. I had not returned to repeat my old life. I had returned to make a different choice. Not by destroying him. Not by screaming. Not by becoming cruel. By refusing to play the role he had written for me. That had been my real second chance. My phone vibrated. A message from Mia. "Dinner tomorrow? You owe me coffee." I smiled. "Fine, but you owe me dessert." Her reply came immediately. "Deal." I put the phone away. For once, I didn't feel the need to know what tomorrow would bring. I had spent one life trying to control every outcome. Then I spent another trying to correct the past. Now I understood. A life wasn't measured by how perfectly we avoided pain. It was measured by what we chose after pain changed us. I walked to the front door. The city stretched beyond the glass. Lights, traffic, rain beginning to fall. For a moment, I remembered the headlights from the night I died. The fear, the regret, the question I had carried into darkness. If I had one more chance, what would I do differently? Now I knew. I would stop trying to save people who wanted to use me. I would stop confusing silence with weakness. I would stop measuring my worth by someone else's approval. And when the moment came to choose, I would choose myself without abandoning the people who needed me. I opened the door. Cool air touched my face. Behind me, the lights of the surgical center remained bright. Ahead of me, the city waited. I stepped forward. I didn't look back, because this time, there was nothing behind me that I needed to reclaim. The past had already taken everything it could. And somehow, after losing it all, I had finally found a life that belonged to me.